Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. Today's episode is the final episode in the My Scrapbooking Approach series, and if you haven't seen this series, this is the fourth episode, so you can go back and check them all out. Episode 1 is on how I organize my photos and how I make sure that they're well backed up. Episode 2 talks about how I narrow all of my photos down just to choose the ones that I'm going to scrapbook about, with an emphasis that we can't scrapbook everything. Episode 3 talks about the photo editing steps I take before I print my photos. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about how I store my photos and stories in a binder so that they're ready to go when I sit down to scrapbook. So let's go ahead and get started. At the end of the last episode, I talked about how I edit my photos. And in this file system on my Mac, I keep a lot of folders to sort and store my photos once they're waiting for editing or once they've already been edited. And I am a very organized person, so I'd just like to remind you that this is not instructions on how you should scrapbook. This is just examples of what I do, and hopefully some of them will be helpful to your process as well. So like I said, I'm super organized, so I have lots of folders within folders that help me keep things separated and ready to go. Now, I've already printed all my photos through the month of May of this year, so I don't have any photos in here waiting to go. So let's go ahead and move on to what I do once they're printed. Here is my story binder, and it's a very simple, just a 2-inch thick binder from the office supply store. I have a label on the end of who that binder goes with, so I have multiple binders. One for each kid, one for myself / family events, and so on. Inside the binders, I have month tabs, and they go January through December. And I rarely have photos older than a year old that I'm working on, because if I haven't scrapped them by then they haven't been that important. So you'll notice that I have all of those little 3x5 cards in there, and we'll get to that in a minute. So here's what I do when I've finished up a month. I will take that month out of the binder, and I make sure I have empty photo sleeves in between each month section so that when I have my photos ready, they're in there. And you can see each month section has a tab, and it's all in there ready to go. That means that the stories at the front of my binder are always my oldest photos. And while I don't scrapbook in chronological order, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, it does encourage me to scrapbook older photos first, and that way I can stay within that year time range that I mentioned previously. Now here's what I do with those 3x5 cards. I reuse them, so I will generally write on them in pencil. And what do I write? We'll get to that in a minute. And then once I'm done with them in my photo binder, I will pull them out, erase them, and reuse them. So here is my stack of photos. It's all printed and ready to go. And here is my stack of 3x5 cards. And so some of them you can see have mess on them that isn't erasable, but for the most part I can reuse them. Now I will separate out my photos. I'm going to write the name of the person this scrapbook layout will be about. I will write the date that the photos were taken, or a date range if they cover multiple time frame. And then I will make any notes on these note cards. Sometimes I'll sketch a layout design. Sometimes I'll write down some bits of journaling I want to be sure to use. Sometimes I will make notes about which products I would like to use. And then I will put that card with those photos, and I will tuck them away in my story binder. So I just continue on with this process, and I usually do this 1 month at a time. So I will print a whole month's worth of photos. And because my daughters are very close and they do a lot of activities together, I will often print the exact same photos for one daughter's album and then the same set for a second daughter's album. And I will often just scrapbook the exact same layout, considering if I've run out of products or whatever, but usually they match. But because they go in different albums, that doesn't bother me. All right, and here we are back in my story binder, and you can see sometimes I will store memorabilia or little pieces of product that I know I want to use, and then I grab my photos and I slide them into one of these page protectors, and these are just heavy-duty page protectors from the office supply store, and I usually just use their generic office brand. And then that helps save those stories aside, and then I grab my other kids' album, I flip to the correct section of photos that I'm working on, and you can see I offset those stacks of photos so that when I'm ready to file them away, it's easy to just grab the next date in the stack and file them exactly where they need to go. Sometimes I will have more stories and page protectors, so I keep spare page protectors at the back of the book so I can just grab an extra one and move it into the correct month section. And then my stories are all organized. And here is just a super quick example. I have all of these photos printed from my daughter's graduation last summer, and you can see me drawing up a little sketch of how I want to take care of this layout. And because I have lots of small pictures that go with a larger picture, I'm going to do a 2-page sketch for a 2-page layout. I add notes onto my little card here so that everything is organized and makes sense. Photos aren't the only part of my memory keeping system. Here you see printouts, and what these printouts are is basically journal pages for my kids. And what I do is I just use my note system to set up a table, and I put the dates on the left-hand side and the day of the week in another column, and then whatever notes that I want to record go in the biggest column there. And so I can just keep track of small moments in their lives that might otherwise get missed. So between the two types of memory keeping, I feel like I've got a good handle on a lot of things. And when I've got these all printed out, and if there's 2 pages, I'll staple them together. I fold them in half and I tuck them into the month that they belong with right behind that month tabbed page. So what do I do with these journal pages once I have them all stored away? I will take the layout that starts off each month and I will create a pocket on the back of that page and tuck this journal page behind there. And in order to access it easily, I put these little tabs on there. And you can see me, that is my favorite punch in the world, this tab punch, and I don't know what I would do if that tab punch ever breaks because I use it all the time. So you can see I create this little pocket with half a sheet of just plain white cardstock, and I keep a stack of that next to my desk for when I'm working. And then I put that journal card back there and then tuck my layout away. Now normally I will do this as I'm working on layouts, but if I'm in a hurry for some reason and I don't get to that step, I will do it like you see me doing here. I'll go back and find the matching layout that goes with each journal page and put it there. Now here I have 2 journal pages going on the same layout, and that's because I didn't have any photos from one month. So I just doubled up those journal pages for the next month. And in the end, my albums look like this. You can see all of these tabs sticking out of the top of the album. Now I keep them low enough that they don't really interfere when I put them away on the bookshelf, and that works just fine for me. And each tab here starts a new month in this chronological record keeping that I have in my scrapbook pages. Okay, it may seem like we're at the end, but not quite. I have one more piece of organization that I do, and that is keeping this file of notes in my note-keeping app, which I use Evernote, and that allows me to keep these notes on my phone and my laptop, which comes in really handy because I will add notes in here as I file away my photos to keep track of which stories I'm telling for which months. And that's because while I don't scrapbook in chronological order, I do store my layouts in chronological order. And one of my pet peeves is having gaps in my albums or having not enough space to file the photos that I need. So I do stay very organized in keeping track of which stories I am telling. If I add something along the way, I go ahead and add it into my notes. If I decide to eliminate a layout, I add that into my notes. And for the most part, that keeps my albums very tidy, keeps them on track. And then when I'm ready to file away these layouts, I refer back to this list so that I know how much room I need to leave and which layouts are going to be in which order. So that is the final look at my very organized process of keeping track of storytelling and story organization. All right, now that I've talked enough about my approach, let's talk about some key points that are broadly applicable to anybody's approach. So the key point number 1 is how to keep track of stories. We can do that through photos, we can do that through journal pages. And then in terms of longer term tracking, do you want to keep a list of stories to tell? Do you want to get super organized like I am with very specific stories from very specific time periods? So what do you think will work for you to keep track of that? Now, maybe you have a great memory and you can just remember it. I don't, so I stay organized. Point number 2 is, how do you save all of the pieces that you want to go with a story? So often stories will include photos, they will include detail words about those stories, the actual words of the story. They may include memorabilia or specific products that you want to go with the layout. So is there a way that you know what you're going to need when you sit down to scrapbook so that you save time gathering those things together? Point number 3 is, how do you want your stories to be organized overall? So how are your albums organized? I keep my kids' albums chronologically organized, but I do have other parts of my life that are organized in different ways. So I have my own album that is called Pieces of Me that are just random stories. And that random aspect isn't really working very well for me, so I'm going to start collecting stories into categories of my life. So a category for parenting, a category for my childhood, etc. So what are your albums like right now, and what do you wish they would be? Point number 4 is, do you keep the smaller details of life? So photos tend to take up a lot of our scrapbooking energy, but I really like keeping my journal pages because they capture all the smaller bits that are happening on a daily basis. When my daughter had a sleepover this week, what the temperature was like, things like that. So I appreciate having those extra details to add more depth to my albums. So is that the kind of thing that is important to you, or do you just want to stick with those photos? That's something to think about in the long term. So that finally wraps up this episode as well as this series. I really hope that by showing my approach to things, it can offer some tips and ideas for other people who may be struggling in their own approach. And if you have great ideas that work for you, share them, because I'm only one point of view, and it's good to have more than one voice in this conversation. So I will be back on Wednesday with my final layout process video for the month of June, and I have some exciting projects starting in July, so I hope you will continue to join me. I'll see you next time.